A brush stroke trembles against canvas. Wrinkled hands, once steady enough to defuse bombs as 007, now shake slightly as they guide the paintbrush across a seascape. Pierce Brosnan stands alone in his Malibu studio, surrounded by paintings of the ocean that claimed no lives on screen but has witnessed his tears off camera. At 72, his silver hair catches the California light, his face still handsome but etched with a sorrow Hollywood makeup could never conceal. On a nearby shelf, 2 photographs, his first wife Cassandra and their daughter Charlotte, both taken by the same merciless disease, both gone before their time. The man who once seemed immortal on screen now lives with the most mortal of pains: survival when those you love don't. His eyes linger on the photos, then return to his canvas. The sea he paints roils with emotion his public persona rarely reveals. But to understand how Pierce Brosnan became the man standing before this canvas, how the debonair spy became the grieving artist, we must return to where it all began, on the shores of another coastline, where a boy waited for a father who never came home. This is the untold story of Pierce Brosnan, not just the suave agent who reinvigorated the Bond franchise, but the abandoned child, the struggling artist, the devoted husband who held his wife's hand through terminal illness, and the father who would later watch, helpless, as history repeated its cruelest pattern. Behind the tuxedo and confidence lay a man acquainted with loss at every turning point of his life, whose greatest role was never captured on film, that of a survivor, rebuilding after each devastation with quiet dignity. If this story moves you, tap like so others might find it, because beneath the glitz of Hollywood lies a human journey of resilience few could imagine. Navan, County Meath, Ireland, 1954. A stone cottage with a blue door stands at the edge of town. Inside, a baby boy sleeps while his mother, May, tends to household chores. Thomas Brosnan, the father, has already gone, departed for England to find work, leaving his family behind. Pierce would later recall, "My father left when I was an infant. I was brought up by my mother and my grandparents." This first abandonment planted a seed of loss that would flower repeatedly throughout his life. By age 4, when May followed Thomas to London to train as a nurse, young Pierce was left in the care of his maternal grandparents. Their cottage had no electricity, no indoor plumbing. He slept in a small room with his grandfather Philip Smith, a quiet man who took the boy fishing and taught him to appreciate silence. "He was my father figure," Pierce would later say. "We shared the same bed until I was about 9 or 10. He never said much, but I felt safe with him." When May finally established herself in London, she sent for her son. But the Ireland to England journey proved merely the first displacement in a childhood defined by uprooting. In London, Pierce found himself an outsider, the Irish Catholic boy with the funny accent. At school, he was called Irish instead of his name. "I was pretty much a nomad," he would recall, "always on the outside looking in." August 12, 1964. 11-year-old Pierce sits in a movie theater in London, watching Sean Connery as James Bond in Goldfinger. The darkness of the theater conceals the wonder in his eyes. For a boy whose father had vanished and whose mother worked night shifts, the confident spy on screen represented everything he wasn't: in control, unflappable, wanted. "I was captivated," he would later confess, "but it never occurred to me that I could be an actor." Where I came from, men worked construction or drove buses. When his mother married Bill Carmichael, a Scottish World War II veteran, Pierce gained a stepfather who took him to see more films. But the newfound stability proved fleeting. At school, the Irish boy remained an outsider, his artistic tendencies marking him further from his peers. "I was always drawing, always in my own world," he once said. "I didn't fit in." At 16, Pierce left school. Too tall, too thin, too quiet, he drifted between odd jobs: fire eater in a circus, illustrator, commercial artist. But something inside him remained restless, unfulfilled. Then came the moment that would alter his trajectory forever. August 1973, Oval House Theatre, London. 20-year-old Pierce sits in the audience watching an experimental play. The actors seem free in a way he has never experienced, expressing emotions he had been taught to suppress. After the performance, drawn by an inexplicable pull, he approaches a workshop instructor. "Can anyone join?" he asks. The response, "Yes, come Monday," opens the door to his true calling. When Pierce told his mother he was going to study acting, she responded with typical Irish pragmatism. "It's a fine thing, but what will you do for a living?" The boy, who had been abandoned, relocated, and marginalized, was about to step into a profession defined by rejection. Yet perhaps this was fitting. He had been preparing for it all his life. In 1975, Pierce entered the Drama Centre London, known for its grueling method acting approach. Here, the shy Irishman was broken down and rebuilt. "It was 3 years of tears, sweat, and fears," he would later recall. "I was terrified most days, but I knew I had found my place." The acting school taught him to channel his sense of loss, his outsider status, into characters. His unresolved pain became his greatest asset. Then, on a fateful day in 1977, in a house in Fulham, London, Pierce met Australian actress Cassandra Harris at a party. She was sophisticated, already established in the industry, and married. "She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen," he would recall. "I never thought she would look twice at me." But look, she did. After her marriage ended, they began a relationship that would become the great love and the great tragedy of his life. December 16, 1980. A modest registry office in London. Pierce Brosnan, 27, and Cassandra Harris, 31, exchange vows. She already has 2 children from her previous marriage, Charlotte, 9, and Christopher, 7, whom Pierce would later adopt. "I never knew my father," he would say, "so being a father to her children was enormously important to me." Within a year, they would welcome their son, Sean. For the boy who grew up fatherless, creating a stable family became his highest priority, higher even than his budding career. But Hollywood was calling. Cassandra, already established with small roles in films including the James Bond movie For Your Eyes Only, encouraged Pierce to try his luck in America. They sold their London home and relocated to California in 1982, another uprooting, but this time with purpose. "We arrived with a few suitcases and enormous hope," Pierce would recall. "I had $2,000 in my pocket. We rented a house in Malibu that we couldn't afford because Cassie believed in projecting success. Within weeks of arriving, Pierce auditioned for a detective series called Remington Steele. The network had seen nearly 200 actors, but when the Irishman walked in, tall, handsome, with that lilting accent, the search was over. October 1st, 1982. Remington Steele premieres on NBC. Overnight, Pierce transforms from struggling actor to television heartthrob. The show's conceit, he played a con man who assumed the identity of a fictional detective invented by a female private investigator, allowed him to channel both his charm and his experience of assuming new identities to survive. Viewers were captivated. Fan mail poured in. Magazine covers followed. For 5 years, Remington Steele defined his career. The family bought a proper home. The children attended good schools. Pierce became an American citizen. From the outside, it appeared he had escaped the cycle of loss that defined his early years. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. The golden handcuffs of television success began to chafe. Film offers came in but had to be rejected due to his TV schedule. Most painfully, in 1986, he was offered the role of James Bond for The Living Daylights, after Roger Moore's retirement, the very character who had captured his imagination as a boy in that London theater. "I thought it was mine," Pierce would later say. "I thought I had it." NBC, seeing the publicity value, announced they were canceling Remington Steele. Pierce prepared to step into Bond's tuxedo. Then, capitalizing on the renewed interest, the network reversed course, renewing the show and invoking their option on his contract. The Bond role went to Timothy Dalton instead. "It was a body blow," Pierce admitted, "to get so close to a childhood dream and have it snatched away." But this professional disappointment would soon be overshadowed by a far greater tragedy. 1987. Cassandra feels unwell while filming in India. Persistent stomach pains send her to doctors upon her return to Los Angeles. The diagnosis is devastating: ovarian cancer, the same disease that had taken her own mother. Pierce, who had lost so many people in his life, now faced the prospect of losing the center of his world. "Everything changes in that moment," he would later reflect. "Your perspective narrows to a single point, keeping the person you love alive." For 4 years, Pierce stepped back from acting to become Cassandra's primary caregiver. Between hospital visits and treatments, he cooked meals, cared for their children, and tried to maintain normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. The man who projected confidence on screen now found himself utterly powerless. "You wake each day with hope and go to bed each night with prayer," he once said, "and in between, you try to find courage you're not sure you possess." He watched as the vibrant woman he adored was reduced by the disease, her beauty and spirit intact, but her body failing. December 18, 1991. Cassandra Harris Brosnan dies in her husband's arms at their Los Angeles home. She was 43 years old. Pierce was 38. Their son, Sean, was 8. Her children, Charlotte and Christopher, whom Pierce had adopted, were 20 and 18. In interviews years later, his voice would still catch when speaking of this day. "I was at the end of the bed, and she asked me to hold her." She had this wonderful sense of humor. She said, "Always earn what you charge for your performances." And then she took her last breath. The boy, who had been abandoned by his father, separated from his mother and made to feel an outsider throughout his youth, now faced the ultimate loss. "I went crazy for a while," he would admit. "I didn't know who I was. Drinking too much, not sleeping. I was mad with grief." Yet, for the sake of their children, he had to go on. And in a cruel twist of fate, it was in the aftermath of this devastating loss that his career would reach its greatest heights. June 28, 1994. Pierce is summoned to a meeting at Pinewood Studios outside London. In the same building where Sean Connery had filmed those Bond scenes that captivated him as a boy, producer Albert "Cubby" Broccoli makes the offer, "We would like you to be the next James Bond." At 41, Pierce Brosnan is handed the role that slipped through his fingers 8 years earlier. The moment should have been triumphant. The orphaned boy from Ireland had secured one of the most coveted roles in cinema. Yet he could not share it with the woman who had believed in him from the start. "I looked up at the ceiling of the studio and said, 'Cassie, we did it,'" he would later recall, "because it was her drive and belief that got me here." His first Bond film, GoldenEye, would gross over $350 million worldwide, reinvigorating a franchise that had faltered. Critics praised his performance, the perfect balance of Connery's toughness and Moore's wit. 3 more successful Bond films would follow: Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. Pierce Brosnan had not only secured his place in Hollywood, he had become an icon. But the price of fame was steep. Bond's schedule kept him away from his children when they needed him most. The very success that should have healed his wounds only seemed to deepen them. "I'd be lying if I said it filled the hole," he confessed in a rare, unguarded interview. "Nothing fills that hole." And then, just as he had begun to rebuild his personal life, finding love again with environmental journalist Keely Shea Smith, welcoming 2 more sons, Dylan and Paris, the past reached out with cruel hands. June 2013. Pierce receives a phone call that brings him to his knees. Charlotte, Cassandra's daughter, whom he had raised as his own since she was a child, has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer, the same disease that claimed her mother and grandmother. Despite aggressive treatment, the cancer is relentless. Pierce flies to London to be by her side. June 28, 2013. Exactly 19 years to the day after he was offered the role of James Bond, Pierce holds Charlotte's hand as she takes her last breath. She was 41, 2 years younger than her mother had been when diagnosed with the same disease. She left behind a husband and 2 children. "To watch someone you love disappear before your eyes for the second time," Pierce would later say, his voice breaking, "There are no words." August 2013. Pierce stands on the set of a romantic comedy, attempting to deliver lines about love and happiness while privately drowning in grief. "Action is called, and you have to perform," he would later say, "but inside, you're screaming." The man who had played the indomitable Bond was now fighting a private battle he could not win. The loss of Charlotte reopened all the wounds of Cassandra's death. The genetic nature of their cancer added another layer of fear. Would his granddaughters face the same fate? The questions haunted him. In interviews, he maintained his composure, but close observers noted a new fragility behind his eyes. The consummate professional continued working, but something had changed. His post-Bond career had already proven challenging. Like many who don the tuxedo, he found himself typecast, offered roles that were pale imitations of 007. Critics could be cruel, comparing each performance to his Bond work. "The trap of Bond is real," he admitted. You become so identified with the character that casting directors can't see past it. There were bright spots. His singing role in Mamma Mia showed a willingness to poke fun at himself, and his performance in Roman Polanski's The Ghostwriter reminded audiences of his dramatic capabilities. But for every critical success, there were disappointments. Planned franchises like The November Man failed to launch. Younger actors were now securing the roles once offered to him. At home, at least, he found solace. His marriage to Keeley remained strong despite tabloid scrutiny. Their Malibu home became his sanctuary. "She saved me, truly," he said of Keeley. "She has such strength and compassion." Yet even this relationship faced public criticism when paparazzi photos showed they had both aged. Keeley no longer the slim young journalist, Pierce no longer the chiseled spy. When social media critics attacked her appearance, Pierce defended her fiercely. "I love every curve of her body. She is the most beautiful woman in my eyes." For a man whose early career was built on physical beauty, aging in the public eye proved another test. Hollywood, never kind to its elders, began to see him differently. Roles became scarcer, less substantial. The phone that once rang constantly with offers now remained silent for stretches. In this professional desert, Pierce turned inward. He returned to his first love, art. The boy who had once found escape in drawing now found healing in painting. His Malibu home studio became his refuge. "When I paint, I forget everything else," he explained. "Time disappears. Grief lifts, at least temporarily." His canvases, moody seascapes, abstract explorations of emotion, revealed the depth behind the polished exterior. Yet the shadow of loss never fully receded. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, each marked another year without Cassandra, without Charlotte. "You learn to live with it," he said of grief, "but it changes you fundamentally. There's the person you were before and the person you become after. They are not the same." The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. The orphaned boy who had created a family to heal his childhood wounds had been forced to watch that family fragment through no fault of his own. The actor who projected invincibility on screen couldn't protect those he loved most. The man whose image graced magazine covers worldwide found no comfort in fame. At industry events, he maintained the Pierce Brosnan everyone expected, charming, gracious, immaculately dressed. But those close to him saw the toll each public appearance took. "You put on the mask," he once confided, "and sometimes you forget it's there until you're alone again." As he entered his late 60s, another threat loomed. The industry that had embraced him began to forget him. Younger audiences knew Bond only as Daniel Craig. Streaming services sought newer faces. The parts offered were often caricatures, the distinguished villain, the aging Lothario. For a man who had fought so hard for legitimacy beyond Bond, it was a bitter pill. "You realize none of it was ever in your control," he reflected in a 2018 interview. "Not the highs, not the lows. All you can control is how you respond." For Pierce, that response was a quiet dignity. He refused to become bitter, refused to criticize the industry that was slowly edging him out. Instead, he focused on what remained: his art, his family, his philanthropy. But in quiet moments, when the house was still, the weight of all he had lost would sometimes overwhelm him. The boy from Navan who, had conquered Hollywood found himself, in his 7th decade, confronting questions of legacy, mortality, and meaning that no amount of fame could answer. Malibu, 2022. Pierce stands at his easel as ocean light filters through the studio windows. At 69, his hair has turned completely silver, but the face beneath remains recognizable. Those same eyes that once surveyed villains' lairs now studying the canvas before him. His paintings, once a private hobby, have begun to sell at galleries for substantial sums. "I find it amusing," he says with characteristic understatement, "that people would pay for my daubs." This third act has brought unexpected joys. His sons from his marriage to Keeley, Dylan and Paris, have grown into accomplished young men, one a filmmaker, the other a model and environmental activist. His elder son, Sean, has established himself as a producer and director. His relationship with Christopher, Cassandra's son, has weathered difficult periods but remains intact. His grandchildren, including Charlotte's children, bring a light to his life he had feared might be permanently extinguished. "Family is everything," he says simply. "The rest, the fame, the money, it's smoke. This perspective comes at a cost few would willingly pay, but it has granted him a wisdom that transcends his Hollywood image. His film career continues, albeit differently. No longer the leading man in major studio productions, he has found freedom in independent films that allow him to explore characters far removed from Bond. Films like The Foreigner in 2017 showed a willingness to play against type, portraying a grieving father seeking revenge rather than the suave hero. Critics noted a new depth in these performances, a lived-in quality his earlier work sometimes lacked. At this stage, he reflects, you're not trying to prove anything anymore. You're trying to tell the truth. The truth, for Pierce, includes embracing his age rather than fighting it. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he has avoided extensive cosmetic procedures, allowing the years to show on his face. Each line tells a story, he says. Why would I erase the story? His relationship with the Bond legacy has evolved as well. Initially reluctant to discuss the role that defined his career, he now speaks of it with appreciation. Bond gave me a career, he acknowledges, and with that career, I could take care of my family. How could I not be grateful? When Daniel Craig assumed the role, Pierce was among his most vocal supporters, understanding better than most the pressure the younger actor faced. Yet beneath this hard-won equilibrium, the losses remain. Certain dates, Cassandra's birthday, the anniversary of Charlotte's death, still bring a retreating into himself that those close to him recognize. Grief, he once said, is like an unwanted guest who never fully leaves. You just create space for it to exist without letting it consume everything. His environmental activism, largely inspired by Keely's work, has become another focus. The man who once saved the world on screen now works to save it in reality, advocating for ocean conservation, clean energy, and climate action. What world are we leaving for our grandchildren? He asks. That's the question that matters now. In 2023, as he approached his 70th birthday, a Lifetime Achievement Award finally acknowledged what audiences had long recognized, that the orphaned Irish boy had built a career spanning nearly 5 decades, encompassing over 70 films, and leaving an indelible mark on cinema history. Accepting the honor, he said simply, I stand here because others believed in me when I did not believe in myself. The tragedy of Pierce Brosnan, perhaps, is not just what he lost, but what those losses revealed, that fame cannot shield us from fate, that success does not preclude suffering, that even James Bond is powerless against life's greatest villains, illness, aging, and mortality. Yet his response to these tragedies may be his most powerful performance of all. I've learned that resilience isn't about being unbreakable, he says, cleaning his brushes as the California sun begins to set. It's about how you gather the pieces after you've been broken. And maybe, if you're lucky, you create something beautiful from them. At 72, Pierce Brosnan carries his losses with him, not as weights dragging him down, but as the very substance from which he has forged his remaining days. The actor who once chased villains across movie screens now pursues simpler pleasures, family dinners, walks on the beach with Keely, hours in his studio making art that needs no audience. In the end, he reflects, it's not about how many people know your name. It's about how many people truly know your heart. Today, as Pierce stands before his canvas in that Malibu studio, the light catching the silver in his hair, he embodies something more profound than the spy he once portrayed. He represents endurance in its most human form, not the invincibility of fiction, but the vulnerability of continuing forward despite wounds that never fully heal. The boy who waited for a father who never returned became a man who never abandoned those who needed him, even when doing so might have been easier. If his journey has moved you, from that stone cottage in Ireland to the heights of Hollywood and through valleys of unimaginable loss, tap like so others might find his story. For in Pierce Brosnan's life lies a question for us all. How do we measure true strength? Is it in never falling, or in how we rise after each fall? Which moment in his journey resonates most deeply with you, and what does that reveal about your own? As darkness falls over the Pacific, Pierce adds one final brushstroke to his canvas. The seascape now complete, he steps back to observe his creation. In the painted waves, there's both turbulence and beauty, much like the life of the man who created them.